Hey everybody, Dave Walker here with the Beta SMB Institute. And as part of our Forward 23 virtual event here, we wanted to give the stage to a number of different companies and leaders who are really on a very consistent basis surveying the small business community, researching the small business community, and frankly, allow us great insights into trends, behaviors, conditions, all of those things. I sincerely do not believe anybody does it better than Alignable. And if this is the first time you're hearing about Alignable, then shame on you. But more importantly, I really strongly encourage you to subscribe to the number of different research documents and surveys that Alignable creates through its millions and millions of small business members. And what I appreciate about it most of all is that it's a combination of what I call quantitative and qualitative results. So you not only get the raw facts of what's the current state of rent in the small business community, what's the level of optimism for fixes to the supply chain, questions like that really, frankly, are give you a macro view of what's going on with small businesses. But in addition to that, you really do get that deep dive into anywhere between 20, 40, 50,000 small businesses responding to Alignable's survey every month. That manifests, by the way, in something called that Alignable coined the term Road to Recovery, a Road to Recovery report that comes out every month and was intended to be a kind of a study of the progress that small businesses were making throughout the COVID pandemic, and then has gone on post-pandemic and into new crises like supply chain and inflation and economic downturn and all the other things that kind of have been very big challenges for the small business community. So a long preamble to introduce my guest, Chuck Casto, who is the head of marketing and communications for Alignable. Welcome, Chuck.
Hey, great to be here, Dave. And you couldn't have said it better, really. There's so much happening month to month. I wish we could do these surveys every week, but unfortunately, that would be too often. But month to month, you see big jumps, and then you see them build upon each other. And then when you look back over the years, you see the trend. It's a March trend. How do we get around it? How do we get ahead of it? So that's one thing I want to talk about today.
That's great. Well, you're bringing us fresh baked bread in the form of your end of February survey that really forms the backbone of your March Road to Recovery report. So hold up that piece of paper that you shared.
Here it is, guys.
Yeah, there it is. Very sophisticated. With charts and bells and whistles. No, I appreciate the fact that you're bringing us kind of this first look at where we are right now. Could not be more immediate in the form of what it's telling us about small businesses. So I'm going to leave it to you to kind of maybe give us a little bit of background on how your methodology behind the Road to Recovery report, how many get surveyed, but then feel free to dive into some of the key findings that you are going to be talking about when you release the Road to Recover report later this month.
Okay, terrific. Well, so our methodology is basically we send out to at least 1 million small businesses randomly selected every month, if not twice a month, depending on whether we're drilling down with another type of survey. So that ends up helping us to get 3,000, 4,000, sometimes 7,000 responses. And those build upon all of the other responses because we compare the last couple of months and sometimes we compare the last year. And when you compare the last year, you're looking at 50,000, 60,000 responses over that year, maybe more. And then you add up all of the 3 years and we're looking at a lot. So it's wonderful that we have this opportunity to do this and to track this in such a way where you can you're really tracking the mood, but you're tracking the needs. And that is really where we come in. And, we've been very lucky, Dave. I mean, we've been getting great coverage, which is wonderful. And that great coverage turns into legislation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're sending this directly to Congress. Congress is reading about the results and doing something about it, or trying to. So that's also very exciting for me. And that's why I'm going to give the appeal saying, I want everyone watching this to make sure that they sign up for Alignable for free so they can take the survey. There are a lot of other things you can do. I'm not here to sell Alignable to you,
Mm-hmm.
but at least get in there and take the survey so your voices are represented here, because we're
Mm-hmm.
all about amplifying the voices of small business. Because Dave, you can attest to this, very few people do it. And then there's a fraction of people who listen after that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm basically getting louder and louder as I've been doing this. And
Mm-hmm.
because I just see the need and I see how it can change things. So I do have the latest, and I mean the latest results. We have right now in this survey, we're going to close it soon, but we have a good 3,500 people who have responded to this survey over the last week, in fact. So this is all very, very fresh. In fact, I checked it this morning. So you can't get fresher. And it's interesting to see where things are headed. And so let me talk about the positives here first. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The positives, we are still seeing small businesses hire. Okay, there are a lot of big businesses. We all know every day there are more layoffs at big businesses, especially tech, but other places too. And we are seeing small businesses are not jumping on that trend yet.
Mm-hmm.
6 months ago, they were. And that was really the story.
Mm-hmm.
And even heading into the holiday season, we were seeing more layoffs, more hiring freezes, all of that. And it was very disturbing because it also matched with our other data that said that people weren't thinking it was going to be a great holiday season in terms of, consumer spending. And
Mm-hmm.
it turns out many of them were right.
Mm-hmm.
But then in January, all of a sudden optimism comes in, and I am naturally an optimist, so that's great. But having done these surveys now for 3 years, every month, I'm like, okay, so this is great. I'm all about small business. I'm all about resilience. We want to help you guys any way we can.
Mm-hmm.
But the January numbers are always more optimistic, no matter what happens. February, pretty strong too, and we've seen that. But now we have March, Dave, and we're coming toward the end of a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, okay, folks, predict this for me. We're almost at the end of the quarter. Is Q1 a boom or a bust?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I had several categories. Okay. It doesn't need to be just one or the other. And we're still seeing a lot of people saying, yeah, no, it's looking good. It's fine, but not ideal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
10% are saying best quarter ever. So psyched.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But a couple months ago, that 10% was closer to 15 or 20%.
Uh-huh.
So we're seeing the optimism, let's say, constrict
Right. Right.
a bit.
Yeah.
And there's always hope. And there's always, what's great about small businesses, and you know this better than anybody, boy, they'll go out, they'll be like, okay, things are a little tight. I'm going to get a second gig here. I'm going to do something, or I'm going to do a deal with a guy down the street, or I'm going to figure out some other way to generate money so that I can keep investing it into the main business and get us over the hump here. And one of our surveys recently showed that at least 50% of small business owners do have some sort of a side hustle.
Interesting.
So that's not, it's not unsettling in the sense that, you know what, they're going to get it done one way or another. But the economic conditions, when the economic conditions constrict too, and we're seeing that more now in March, you know, and expenses go up. What are you going to do? So there are all sorts of things that are happening here. I want to dive into interest rates because we have been
before you do that, let me just ask a kind of do you read the fact that most of your respondents are saying that they're hiring? Is that more of a leading indicator of optimism than even their own self-perception of optimism?
Yes. So I did want to start off with that because we have a whole lot of other news.
Okay.
And I am excited about that. And I'm especially excited about the percentage of folks saying with the layoffs going down. Okay. Or like not nearly as high as we're seeing in the bigger companies. So that does speak to being optimistic. However, I'm going to give you a little preview. I'm not going to talk a ton about hiring here, but I will tell you the answer where we say I'm only hiring temporary staff, or I'm in temporary meaning also contractors.
Right.
We're seeing more and more of that because people are hedging their bets. And that was up beyond 20% this month. That's the highest it's been in a long time.
Interesting.
So they're hedging their bets. So that's still optimistic, but it's guarded optimism.
Right. Or conservative optimism. Right. I get it. Yeah.
We'll take it. We'll take optimism in any way, shape, or form. But guarded is better because, and of course, contractors are all small business people too. And sometimes that's their side gig, is that they're a contractor for somebody else.
Right.
So that's all positive in our view of things, but it is interesting to see. And it's higher, Dave. This is really, really fascinating. I know I'm going to nerd out on this, but it's really fascinating that it's higher than it was in November and December, when you think, wait a minute, aren't people, hiring part-time for the holidays? And sure, many were, but not as many as you would think, because many said to us at that time, hey, we've got enough people.
Right.
And we're so tired of the labor shortage and we can't get people in for interviews, and we're just going to make do. We're making the most of it. Even if we have to change our hours, that's it. Like they'd really been tired of more than a year's worth of not being able to find the right people. So they shifted. But now they're shifting to more part-time or contractors, which is smart, and fewer layoffs, which is smart too, because when you have a small business and you're laying people, you lay anybody off, boy, your morale goes down. Everybody's heading for the hills.
Right. Exactly.
So it's a psychological thing, but it's also economic, and they're being really smart about it. So I always love to see that.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we've told you the optimistic news, and I do want to throw this in, that in January, 61%, which is huge. That's a huge number, said that they're thinking 2023 is going to be a good year for their business.
Wow. Okay.
And somewhere around 25% at that point actually said a great year.
Interesting.
And I'm reading it. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to hold you guys to it. I'm glad. I'm glad for you, and I'll report that. But let's see. There are these, the storms that we've been dealing with really for the past year and a half, economic storms. So speaking of that, so let's talk about interest rates, because that is very topical right now, because the feds have been trying to we have been raising them, combating inflation. And on the side of the feds, I have to tell you, they are very committed to that because they really want to bring inflation way down.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, what else are you dragging down with it? And
Mm-hmm.
is the cure worse than the disease
Right. Right.
for small business?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worried about the big guys. Someone else can worry about the big guys. You and I are worried about the small guys,
Right.
and the backbone of our economy, which has been battered. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
many people have said when we've asked, hey, what was worse, COVID or inflation? 60% said inflation was worse.
Right. That's just fascinating because I mean, it does show, particularly for small businesses, the impact that rising prices have.
Right.
Their cost of getting either materials or supplies or employees, all of those things were impacted by that runaway. So are they still, from the March report, are they still primarily focused on interest rates and the combination of interest rates and inflation as being kind of their central problem or challenge?
Well, that is it. Yeah. In combination of interest rates and inflation and the fear
Hmm.
of recession, right?
Right.
And the fear of recession, as many of us know, affects a CFO, whether that CFO is the owner of the business,
Hmm.
okay, or, has a fancy gig at a bigger place. You look at those things and you say, okay, well, we're going to cut, we're going to trim, we're going to do that. But what you don't want to trim is ingenuity.
Right.
I
Great.
mean,
Well said.
that is the number one arrow in the quiver,
Hmm.
right? And that comes in many forms for small businesses. So that's why I'm always hopeful that they're able to be resilient. And the interesting thing is about small business owners, and I meet a ton of them, and I've been that myself
Hmm.
before this.
Hmm.
And they're just like, okay, Chuck, yeah, things are hard, but actually this is easier here. I found something that's easier. And
Yeah.
they build on that.
Interesting.
Or they're like, hey, I always wanted to try this as a side business, and it looks like this is a good thing to do now, or my
Right.
uncle's
Right.
doing it, or my cousin, or so it's all very what's the beauty of it is it's neighborhood based. And it's
Hmm.
like, okay, guys, I'm having trouble here with the coffee shop, or let's say the coffee shop is doing extremely well because people are up all night trying to figure things out.
Right.
Okay. And right. And so it's like, how does the coffee shop turn into a place where small businesses can foster other small businesses
Right.
and exchange ideas? And so there's a lot happening behind the scenes. But so let me get to the big numbers here. The big
Okay.
numbers. And my rent report, this is a funny story. We just added rent in when we were first starting with all of this, saying, okay, we should look at how well people are able to pay their rent.
Hmm.
And it's a question on our survey. And now we have a second question that says something to the effect of, well, how much has your rent gone up,
Hmm.
to track rent spikes.
Hmm.
Well, this one question has become actually a tradition with many of the journalists coming to us.
Hmm.
If we had a 2-question poll, which we don't, we dig in pretty deep. We try to make it 2 minutes, but it's pretty deep. We'd have to have the rent question in there because the rent has turned into a real barometer
Right.
for many observers.
Hmm.
And so that's what one thing I want to say to all the small business people listening now, and all of the people who serve small businesses: don't toss out the random idea.
Hmm.
If you feel like, okay, we had to put this in a survey, or this, my gut tells me this, research it, look into it, try it out,
Hmm.
because that's turned into its own phenomenon, which
Hmm.
no one's more excited about that than I am.
Hmm.
But it's so interesting to see. And so here's the boom. Okay. And this is where I'm watching this. I watch this close. I wake up in the middle of the night to check to see what's going on here. Okay. So somebody send me a life. But anyway, I wake up in the middle of the night. 37%. You're the first ones to hear this. Everybody. 37% couldn't pay their rent in March.
Wow.
Okay. That's not
good.
great.
Right.
It's the height over the last couple of years was 44%, just as things were really kicking in with COVID. That was the worst. It hovered around 40 for a while, maybe 41. Then it's been in the 30s pretty much, or the 20s on a good January. Okay,
right.
The 20s, right? So it's 37% again. And the last time it was 37%, it was October. Okay, heading into Q4, which was a very tough quarter for a lot of small businesses. Okay. Then it got worse in November. It went up to 40. And then it even got up to 41%. And then all of a sudden, January optimism. Hey, you know what? We did a little better than we thought at the end of December, down to 30 in January. We're all excited, throwing a party. We're all excited about that, that's still not great, right? You still don't want almost a third.
You wouldn't wish for that.
You wouldn't wish for that. No, I mean, if it ever gets down to 20, I'll really throw a party.
Right.
But, and then January, it's 30. February, it's 32%. March, what we all just learned, what I learned, and I'm passing it on here, 37% again. And we're digging into the fact to see which industries are having the toughest time. We can talk a little bit about that based on February's report. Transportation was having one heck of a time. Automotive was having a harder time after being able to sell all kinds of cars because there was scarcity and all of that. And finally, their rates went way up. People were like, listen, we can't buy a new car. So that's been an issue last month. We'll have to see what happens as we dig into the details this month. Last month, the good news was retail turned a little bit more positive. It went from 42% of retailers unable to pay the rent to 38%, which was the best month they've had since September.
Okay.
We'll have to see what happens this month. But restaurants went back up again to 40% last month. And that always has people worried because, restaurants are really they're like, restaurants are to a community what the kitchen is to your house. I mean, it really is where people come together, the coffee shop, the fancy restaurant. It's where they're celebrating life and they're exchanging ideas and all of that. And when that goes down, it's also a quality of life issue.
Right.
For consumers.
Right. So in the context of the chunkiest expense items in the average small business's P&L, payroll always is number one. Right. But where does rent stand? Is it top 5? Is it number 2? Is it number 10? Is it a hugely impactful number from the expense standpoint?
Well, it is depending on what business, right?
Right. Obviously, right.
Restaurants and retail, brick and mortar, it's a big deal because if you can't make the rent or you can't negotiate with your landlord about it, then you might have to close. Like it might, so that becomes, that's where they might start layoffs. Right? Just so they can pay the rent because they can only just sit on the rent so long. So that's it. And it's way up there. It's definitely top 5, if not top 2 for some of these.
Right. I'm sure. The fact that it remains kind of static, it's not like it adjusts to your income stream in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
or something you can call the landlord and say, "Hey, can I only pay $3,000 this month versus seven?" Doesn't
Right.
happen, and so there really are, maybe at best once a year you have an opportunity to lay hands on that lever called rent and either go
Right.
up or go down. But given the fact that so many landlords are frankly trying to make up for the losses of COVID,
Right.
they have no appetite whatsoever to cutting anybody a break. And I've heard that across executive office space, retail. You're exactly right. Um, even those who are maybe have launched a side e-commerce business and are trying to rent a warehouse. I've heard
Right.
the cost of warehouse rental is just absolutely astronomical right now in a number of
Right.
different geographies. So that's really quite fascinating. And I know how torn you get about kind of the implications of one data point versus another data point in the road
Right.
to recovery report.
Right.
The optimism
Right.
stated by small businesses in January
Right.
reconciled with the large chunk of people who say I can't pay my rent right now.
Right.
How do you reconcile those two things? I mean, can you be optimistic and know you're not paying your rent?
Well, okay, so I have two answers to that, and you might
Okay.
have a third by the time I'm done with the second. But number one, what we may see is what we saw during COVID, where some of these businesses say, you know what, I'm just going 100% online, or I'm going to shift to emphasize more of my online sales
Mm-hmm.
than I am for my brick and mortar sales and see if those will lift me up. But
Mm-hmm.
if not, they may end up going online. And if they're B2Bs where they have an office and they're having trouble, they might just be like, hey, we're working from home. We'll put up a
Mm-hmm.
fancier site. We'll, have that will be our office and we're
Mm-hmm.
working from home. So that's the workaround
Mm-hmm.
there,
Mm-hmm.
for them. But in terms of the overall optimism, I think I'm going to have to wait till April to
Right.
see if we're
Right.
okay. Does it go back down to 34, 33, and then does it skyrocket up to 40? I mean, it's almost like being a surfer, right?
Right.
And I mean, small
Right.
businesses, they have to get really good at surfing and the
Right.
balancing, and there's a lot there with that metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But you can only take that really tough wave, that hit, only so many times
Mm-hmm.
before you say, you know what, I'm shifting my business away. Or if you're closer to whatever your retirement age is,
Mm-hmm.
and for many of us there's no such thing as a retirement age, but if you're closer to that, I have seen many of them saying, you know what, Chuck, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
I
Right.
I'm retiring.
Yep.
So
And
that's
we just locally we've seen a lot of those stories. So
right.
let me wrap up by asking you, from where you sit, uh, are there persistent challenges, problems that small businesses have articulated over the last 3 years, through the pandemic, through the early stages of recovery, current state, that you foresee or you could point to and say, that was a problem before the coronavirus, and that's going to be a problem long after there's a full recovery and there's no inflation and people are able to pay their rent and they're hiring and blah blah blah.
Right.
Are there things that you would observe as a longtime observer, small and participant in small business, that you would say are top two or three that are going to
Okay.
persist?
So that's shifting me to this other piece of paper here. So, okay, the challenges that existed before the pandemic that I do believe will certainly exist now and probably will always exist to
Mm-hmm.
some extent. However, if any of you watching this now have really mastered some of these, please let us know.
Please
Okay,
share.
we'll bring you in for a webinar. We'll do all sorts of things. So the long-term problems bringing new customers in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a brand new stat for you on that too.
Mm-hmm.
59% in a survey right before this one said that now is their biggest concern.
Mm-hmm.
59%.
Mm-hmm.
Now, inflation's been the major concern and still is. It's always, they're all tied together. But
Mm-hmm.
59% are like, how do I get new customers in here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how do I do it? So that brings up marketing, right? And that brings up your pricing. And that brings up
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of other factors that they need
Mm-hmm.
to combat. But bringing customers in and new ones, repeat, yes, because you
Mm-hmm.
want customer loyalty. You want those
Mm-hmm.
relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? If you bring your prices too high to match inflation,
Mm-hmm.
those best customers, all of a sudden, you find them at Walmart
Mm-hmm.
later. So you have to balance that. So bringing customers in is a big one, and access to capital
Mm-hmm.
is another one. And that's where the interest rates
Mm-hmm.
become an issue again. Now, let's say we're in a world where, and it's hard to envision this world, but we're going to be optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
where the interest rates are down again, everything's good. Still, what has happened in terms of your credit score during these tough times, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
What is like it's not like, oh, all of a sudden, okay, it's all good. It's like they're looking at the last 3 years, or they're looking at the last year,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens there. So those are two. The other thing that we've really seen is, and this is where I bring up ingenuity, so the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing we've really seen is that people really want to stay fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they know certain things are tried and true, and they always have to
Mm-hmm.
do those. But then what is my opportunity to stay fresh? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's a product line, whether it's a new approach to something strategic planning, coaching, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's going to might be a surprise to you,
Mm-hmm.
but it has been hovering, and I'm about to do a little survey on this. No one knows this, by the way. I'm about to do a little survey on this. Combating ageism.
Hmm.
And that because many small business owners were in the corporate world for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're starting at 45 or 50 or 60. We have
Mm-hmm.
some starting at 65 or 70
Mm-hmm.
who are fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
very, very experienced, very bright, very energetic. But at that point, it's like, how do you combat some of that so that you stay modern?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is something, as I'm seeing the average age of entrepreneurs go up, it's not going down. Sure, there are some of these whiz kids who are 20 something and dropping out of Harvard and whatever, but it's interesting for them. You see how long that lasts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it lasts a long time, but really, most of your small business owners are 35, 40 plus, if not
Mm-hmm.
45 plus. So it's always that struggle to stay very current and very modern, to keep your customer base or client base as wide as possible.
That's this has been terrific. I mean, I think that as anticipated, it's uh, I think your passion for this and the insights that you guys provide is what really gives terrific color to just the facts, man.
Yeah.
It's really terrific.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I'm glad that came out. I'm holding back a little bit. I'm holding back.
Right. And I would encourage everybody to not just subscribe to the Road to Recovery report, become a free member of Alignable, but think about serving up your small business customer base as a potential group that in partnership with Chuck, you survey. because, with how many members are there now, Chuck, in Alignable?
The latest figure is 7.8 million, but it may have slipped up to 7.9 overnight. So
We are cracking the champagne at 10 million. That's an extraordinary number over really not many years that you guys have been able to build that. So chances are, I think it's fair to say, chances are a substantial portion of your customer base is on Alignable.
right.
And linking those two things together in the form of what you can learn about your customers in the context of Alignable's member base is really pretty extraordinary. So I appreciate you a lot. I appreciate you doing this. And I think I've learned a lot, and I want to keep learning. And whether it's on our podcast or whether it's at our events, or just, pickups, being able to really tap into what you're learning and what you're seeing, I think is invaluable for all of us as we frankly try to gauge the same kind of surfing of the waves of optimism and pessimism,
Right.
just categorized that way. It's like, boy, that's a great high wave. Oh, here comes a bad one. Here comes a low
Right,
one.
right, right.
Here comes a big dip.
Tuck in,
Yeah,
take it.
exactly.
Okay, now we'll
Grab
get
hold.
through it. We'll get through it. Well, Dave, thank you so much for this. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We do need to talk more often. I think that's what you're hinting at, and
Yeah.
I'm all over it. Pull me in every month. I don't care.
Yeah.
I always have something new to tell you about.
Yep. That's great. I appreciate it. All right, man. Take care.
Thanks. You too.